welcome to Blackbriar Gaming. Today, we're going to look at a deck type that has become far more competitive with the release of Set 2, and that is a double aggression deck. While double aggression saw some play in Set 1 with Sabine, it has truly come into its own in Shadows of the Galaxy. I believe, more so than any other aspect, that aggression does its best work when doubled down on. The new Han Solo, Worth the Risk, is not only powerful in his own right, and will see a home in all kinds of different decks, he also brings a couple of abilities to an aggression deck that synergize beautifully with both new and old cards. He lets you build a deck that is, funnily enough, aggressive, but in multiple ways. First, let's take a deep look at Han's card. On his leader side, he has the action, play a unit from your hand, it costs 1 less, deal 2 damage to it. So automatically, he's got intrinsic ramp to him that you have to do absolutely nothing to set up, but simply take 2 damage on your unit. Now this can be crippling for certain cards, it makes certain cards unplayable, but for others it can be a bit of a benefit. The main one that I'm thinking of being Guerrilla Attack Pod. This becomes so good with Han that it's ridiculous. We're talking about a 5-cost unit that essentially comes in at 6/4, that is 6 power and 4 health, and potentially comes in ready if bases have damage on them. That's just absolutely fantastic. I've paired him with the Tarkin Town base, which reads action, deal 3 damage to a damaged non-leader unit, an epic action of course, because I just feel if we're running an aggressive deck, let's have a cool ability on our base because we don't need the health to go into the long game. Now, Han Solo, flipping back, when he deploys, his unit side reads, action, play a unit from your hand, it costs 1 less, deal 2 damage to it. Now, you don't have to exhaust him or do anything of the kind, so while he's on his leader side, you can only do that once per phase, but when he's deployed, you can do that multiple times. Each unit you play gets an extra bit of value out of it. If you're in the late game and you happen to play 3 units, you're getting 3 resources worth of value, which is just crazy. His stats, when he's deployed, he has 3 power and 6 health and comes in at 5 resources, which is really nice for an aggressive leader. Yes, there's more aggressive leaders that come in at 4 resources, but they've always got, usually, and always, no, I think always is right, Lando may be the exception here, but Sabine and Kylo, for instance, come in with 4 and 5 health respectively, which is within the zone of being taken down. That is a card that deletes units with 5 health or less. So having that 6 health point is really nice for Han. 3 damage is also pretty good at this point. Geez, it'd be nice if he was 4 power, but that would be utterly broken. So as a leader, when he deploys, his stats are really quite nice, and coming in at 5 is a really nice point as well, because we're seeing a lot of Shadows of the Galaxy leaders coming in at the 6 resource point. So 5, it's good. It's really good. Now that we've looked at Han, let's get into the deck. You'll notice right away that this deck isn't running for a cause I believe in. I felt so hamstrung when building hero aggression decks in Set 1, as the card was simply too good not to shape your card selection around. With aggression getting so many new tools, I believe you can now build a hero aggression deck without it, and in doing so, open up all kinds of options. I firmly believe that hero aggression has done the best out of Shadows of the Galaxy, with Cassian, Poe, and Recker, that we'll look at closely in a minute, all being top tier cards that will be highly sought after, and see a lot of play in the meta. Add on to that the Bo-Katan unit, the Crate Dragon, and you've got a deck that is playing as many great cards as I could jam into it, and often for 1 less resource. Now, let's talk through the deck in detail, looking first at turn order plays, and then getting into the events and upgrades. Now, Han's an interesting one. You really have to ask yourself, do I want to include 2 resource cards, or do I want to go straight to 3 resources using Han's ability? There's a bit of a debate to go either way here. I'm not really sure where Red Han decks, if you will end up with their early curve. Is it better to completely do away with 2 drops and aim to play a 3 resource card turn 1 with some damage on it? Or is it handy to have 2 resource cards to flood the board in the mid to late game? I think it comes down to the deck. A more controlling version of a Red Han deck is probably happy to max out its curve, while a more aggressive version can really take advantage of 2 resource cards that can mostly become 1 resource cards when needed. to combine with other plays. So having 2 drops with 3 health gives you some great flexibility. With that in mind, I have included 2-drop cards in this deck that can be played as 1-drops later in the game to combine with other cards. And the 2 drops that I've included, because I'm going for that more aggressive style, is Bo-Katan Kryze. We've had her revealed only recently. She is a double aspect aggression card. She's a 3/3, which is just premium stats for a 2-drop, and she has the ability, when defeated, for each player with 15 or more damage on their base, draw a card. So aggressive decks need to be drawing card in that mid to late game, otherwise they do run out of steam. So she is fantastic to drop in turn 1, and equally is fantastic to drop in turn 6 or 7 once some damage is on the bases. So Bo-Katan, probably one of, if not the best 2-drop in the game because of this. She is just absolutely fantastic and was kind of my inspiration for wanting to get this deck together. Other 2-drops include the Heroic Renegade. Now, this is quite a new one, and I don't think we had this spoiled by content creators. I think this is kind of just dropped out of nowhere. I could be wrong. It might have come out early, but I haven't had my eyes on it. But it is a 2-cost 2/3, that is 2 power, 3 health, with grit. It has Underworld, not relevant because we're not running Underworld synergy here, but definitely that will be relevant in other decks. But why I really like this in Han is because this can be essentially 1-cost for 1. That is, if you use Han's ability to spend it for 1 less resource, you then put the 2 damage on it. Because of grit, it goes up to 4 power with 1 health, which is just crazy. People love running Greedo, and it's really for his 3/1 stat for 1. Yes, he has that added ability, but that doesn't consistently or reliably come off. But the fact that we now have a 1-cost unit with Han's ability that is a 4/1 is just insane. Noting, of course, that if you want him to stick on the board a little more in that first turn, depending on what your opponent plays, you can just put him down as a 2-cost. And then having Tarkin down to take out an opponent if they swing into him or you swing into them, whatever that looks like. But it gives you options. It gives you flexibility. So this card's really flexible. It can either be a bit more defensive, it can go really hard, and you can play it later on for a really nice extra bit of damage to stick on the board. The next 2-drop I've included is Ketu Ono. So she is a 2-cost, she's a 3/2. Now, I don't love that 2 health stat, but what she brings is just too good not to include. She's a Saboteur, which I think is going to be really relevant in the Shadows of the Galaxy meta, and she has the ability, which is just crazy on a 2-drop, when this unit deals combat damage to a base, which is what you want to be doing with this deck, you may defeat an upgrade that costs 2 or less. Now, that's most upgrades that we're going to see in this game. More expensive upgrades are quite rare. The Dark Saber will probably see play, but other than that, we're not seeing that many upgrades beyond 3 or more resources. So let's just pretend this says it essentially defeats whatever upgrade you want. We're talking experience, we're talking shields, we're talking bounties that your opponent might have played on you. We're talking any kind of cheap upgrades they've played on themselves, which will become quite popular, I believe. Your quick reflexes, your opponent might be playing heroic resolves. There's all kinds of reasons Ketu Ono's ability will be turned on, and I think she's going to be extremely useful and extremely popular. Yes, her stats aren't perfect for a Han Solo deck. If she was a 2/3, for instance, that might have been more handy because you can play her as 1. But saying that, having 3 damage native is also really nice. So I think she's just great, and I will be playing her in all of my aggression heroic decks for the foreseeable future. Now, the last 2-drop that I've included is the Green Squadron A-Wing. You'll see that it's my only space unit, which is such a controversial choice, but the ground units are just so good in this deck that I kind of couldn't help myself. But yes, I've included the one single space unit. Green Squadron A-Wings are just so good with that raid 2 and that 3 health in space. Arguably, this could change out, and I'll talk about that a bit in the post-deck analysis, but I've gone for this one here. I wanted to have at least 1 space unit so I could swing into my opponents if needed, if they were starting to take over that lane, but at the same time, being able to push damage in that lane is always handy, and being able to quickly lane dodge when needed with an A-Wing could win you some games. So that is all of my 2-drops, my turn 1 plays, but they can be played obviously later in the game, and for 1 resource if you want. Moving on into our turn 2 plays, our 3-drops, we've got Cassian Andor. Actually, I won't start with Cassian because he's not really a turn 2 play. We'll talk about his smuggler in a minute, but we've got Fighters for Freedom. Now, this wasn't a premium card in set 1. It saw quite a bit of play, but it didn't feel like a good choice, and it would come in and out of decks, especially Sabine, red-green. But I think it's really good. So obviously it's got the when you play another red card, you may deal 1 damage to the base. We're running an all aggression deck, so of course that ability is going to be turned on for every single card that we're playing because we don't have any just heroic aspect cards in here. So if you get in for only 2 or 3 extra damage on the base, it's going to feel real fantastic. It's got that 3-4 stat line, and that 4 health is really nice because that means with Han Solo, we can play Fighters for Freedom at 2 resources, and it then becomes a 3-2. Now, I don't like putting down units in the Shadows meta with 3-1 because Cad Bane is going to be so oppressive, and I think we're going to see quite a bit of him. Not necessarily the most competitive leader, but I think he's going to be super popular. So putting down cards with only 1 health on them, I don't think that's going to feel fantastic. So I really like that 4 health space for 3 cost cards or higher if you can get them in this deck. But I'll also talk about that a little more later. So Fighters for Freedom also can be a turn 1 play if you want it to be, and it's actually a pretty fantastic turn 1 play as a 3-2 because your opponent has to deal with that. Otherwise, you will just keep getting that damage for the rest of the game. Saboteur, super relevant. As I said, we're going to see a lot of shields. We're going to see a lot of experience. We're going to see a lot of upgrades. Not that that's relevant going back. We're going to see a lot of shields and we're going to see a lot of Sentinel. There we go. In the Shadows meta. So I think Fighters for Freedom and having Saboteur is super relevant because there has been some amazing new Sentinels come out that will be very, very popular. So that is our 3 costs that can either be turn 1 or turn 2 plays, and by that I mean it's my 1 3 cost. The other 3 cost is Cassian Andor. So Cassian come out recently, he's everything we want in this deck. He is a 3-5, which is premium stats for a 3 resource unit. Noting, of course, you can bring him in on turn 1 as a 3-3, which is, once again, premium stats for a turn 1 play. But he also has Smuggle 5, and the ability, when played using Smuggle, ready this unit. So good. Just so good. Having a card in your resource line that you can smuggle in at any moment and come in ready to just push 3 damage or more if you're using events or upgrades in combination with him is crazy. And honestly, this felt like the most powerful card when I was doing testing in this deck. It felt like this is what actually won games because it just comes out of nowhere. You smuggle it in, he does 3 damage, maybe more. I was commonly holding a heroic resolve in my hand until I was up to the point where I could pretty safely play Cassian, chuck a heroic resolve on him, and then just swing in for big bits of damage. So that's Cassian. I think he absolutely makes aggression heroic decks that much more competitive, and he will see play, I have no doubt, in every single aggression heroic deck that we see. He's not just a personal favorite of mine, I think he's going to be a favorite of everybody. So that's Cassian. You feel great playing him for 3, you feel wonderful playing him for 2 with Han's ability, and you feel really good paying him with Smuggle for 5. At any point, so flexible, can do so many things. It just gives you that not even out of hand, it gives you that out of nowhere damage that really pushes this deck. So that is the 3 cost units. Now looking at our 2 4 cost units. We have Ketu Ono. He will still be a staple. He's still an amazing card. Because he has that when defeated ability, he also synergizes really well with Han in that you don't mind him being a bit damaged. There's points, in fact, where aggressive players lose games because they can't kill their own Ketu Ono when they swing in. So having 2 damage on him to start with and playing him for 3 resources is just wild and can actually be a benefit, getting that when defeated ability off earlier to maybe close out a game. So paying him 3 resources to put down a 4-2 Ketu Ono, it just feels so good. The other 4-drop is Saw Gerrera. Here, he only has 4 health, which I don't love, but I do love his ability, which is as an additional cost for each opponent to play an event, they must deal 2 damage to our base. Now, we're running double aggression, so we've got to be including some double aggression cards, just for flavor, if nothing else, and Saw's ability is so unique and so fantastic against certain decks that I can't not include him. it's essentially, even if your opponent deals with him right away with an event, you're still getting that 2 damage in for those 4 resources. So he's doing something and pushing that aggressive agenda no matter what. So I really like Saw. Once again, you can play him at 3 resources for a 5/2, which is also just really pushing some stats in that 3 resource space. Han's ability, it just does some absolutely wild things. Moving up the curve, we've got Damaran, who is, I think, going to be the most popular legendary in this set. Certainly, I will be hunting him very quickly before he, no doubt, goes up in price. Poe is a 6/6. On attack, discard up to 3 cards from your hand. For each card discarded this way, choose a different option, either dealing 2 damage, defeating an upgrade, or opponent discarding a card from their hand. Those are 3 things you will want to do often. And while this deck doesn't necessarily have a lot of draw, just doing one of those at the right time can absolutely change the board state or swing you a game. So I think Poe's great. Paying 4 resources because of Han's ability to put him down as a 6/4 is also an amazing choice. I don't know if I'd do that every time. Certainly in my testing games, I was pretty happy to hold off and play him at 5 because that 6 resources makes him a lot stickier and a lot more survivable as opposed to 4, even when you're paying 4 resources for him. But saying that, if you've got some really good combination plays, putting him down as a 4 resource so you can get something else on the board is also pretty fantastic. So there we go. There's Poe. I think he's one of the most powerful cards in this set, and running a deck that can include him is always going to feel really good. Next up, we move to the 6 drops, our turn 5 plays, or turn 4 plays if we're putting them down early, and we've got the Gorilla Attack Pod and Recker. Now, I'll talk about Recker first. Just like Poe, he's just pushing those stats for that price point, which means he's pushing those stats even harder with Han's ability. So for 5 resources, you can get down Recker with 7 damage, yes, only 4 health, but geez, it's going to feel so good. There's no other card that's doing 7 damage for 5 resources, I think, except, of course, your Steadfast Battalions when your leader's out. But this guy's doing it with Overwhelm natively. It's just going to feel really, really good. So, and that when played ability too, getting that off early, yes, it's going to slow down your resource curve, but you don't mind too much because of Han's internal ramp. So playing him at 5 and controlling the board while pushing damage, it's all good. It's all going to feel good. Now, his ability being, you may defeat a friendly resource, and if you do, deal 5 damage to a ground unit. So that's Recker. Much like Poe, he is just a crazy powerful card in this set, and is going to make hero aggression really popular. Then we've got the Gorilla Attack Bot. I kind of talked about this already. I just think this card was a bit average in set 1. Sometimes it saw plays, sometimes it didn't. In this deck, it feels really good. The main reason it wasn't that popular in set 1 is because 4 damage for 6 just didn't feel that fantastic, even if it did come down ready, whereas 6 damage for 5 resources feels really good, even if it is coming in at 4 health. You just need it often to finish out a game and swing once, and being able to do that at 6 damage right off the bat is going to feel really nice. So there is the Gorilla Attack Bod. This deck feels like it was made for it, and it's going to be relevant here, if not many other places. Now, my final ground unit is 3 Crate Dragons. Is this the most competitive option? I'm not sure, but I feel like this deck can do this without ramp because of Han Solo having his own ramp, and that's probably about it. Most other decks, if they want to be running Crate Dragon, they're probably combining with Command to get him out earlier. But Han being able to play him for 8 is going to feel pretty fantastic. And it's going to really put your opponent off guard because that 8 resource space, you're going to get there quite often against mid-range decks. Against enemy aggressive decks, this game is a wild race, and it's a wild race that you're winning not only because of Han Solo's ability to get cards out earlier, because they don't want to be swinging into you, so you're only getting advantage by using Han's ability. So I don't think you're too worried about opponents' aggressive decks. I think this can out-aggro pretty much anything. Against other mid-range and control decks, your Crate Dragon's going to be just so relevant, coming down at 8 resources as a 10/8 with Overwhelm and that absolutely wild ability. When an opponent plays a card, you may deal damage equal to that card's cost to their base or a ground unit they control. So this ability for an aggressive deck just can shut down your opponent so amazingly. If you put this down when they've only got 5 to 6 health left, they almost can't deal with it. There's only a few cards in the game that deal with this, And if they don't have a board presence, because let's say you've been playing Recker and you've dealt 5 damage to something to take out a ground unit, they've been swinging into you, you've got such high damage units that when they're swinging in, you're almost definitely trading with them. They're not keeping things around. So them putting out Great Dragon and just punishing them for having to reinstate that board presence is just going to feel so good. So I think this deck really loves Great Dragon. I will be including it. More testing may be required to see if it's just too expensive, but I don't think it is, and definitely not for 8 resources with Han's ability. That is all of my ground units. As I said before, I have 33 ground units and only 3 space with the A-Wing. That may shift. Certainly in my sideboard, I've included some more space. That may have to shift around and come back into the main board, but I'll talk about the sideboard a little later. First, I want to talk about the events. So we have 4 events here. We have Daring Raid, which is deal 2 damage to a unit or base for only 1. I think that's really good. You can use that as some out-of-hand damage to their base. You can use that to finish off a pesky unit. It's going to be really handy to reach into the space lane if you need to, if your opponent is quite aggressive and they've lane dodged you and they're just smashing you in space. Daring Raid can be pretty handy for those more aggressive space units. I'm talking about things like Kylo's TIE Fighter, for instance. Those 2 health, the Mercenary Gunship maybe as well, that 3 power, 2 health stat that we're seeing come into space. There's 3 of them now, which is crazy. So Daring Raid's going to be really handy there. We've got Carabast, which just feels like it was made for this deck. A friendly unit deals damage to an enemy unit equal to the amount of damage on the friendly unit plus 1. So this will always be turned on with Han's ability because you are doing 2 damage to your own units. So this essentially becomes a 2 cost to do 3 damage at any point that you need to, which that 3 damage spot is really fantastic in the early game. But also later in the game, with your Great Dragon, for instance, if you've locked them down, their only damage is their only option, I should say, is to swing into it with their ground units. Then having Carabast ready to just be an amazing counter and do some serious damage to their remaining units is just fantastic. So Carabast, excellent in this deck. Then we've got Aggression. So this is the reason that you run Double Aspect, is to get the event of the namesake. So Aggression has choose 2 in any order, draw a card, defeat up to 2 upgrades, ready a unit with 3 or less power, and deal 4 damage to a unit. Look, all except the draw a card, which is still fine if there's nothing else to do, but defeating 2 upgrades I think is going to be real handy in Shadows. Once again, it's a very upgrade heavy set. Readying a unit with 3 or less power, we've got lots of units that are doing that. Ketsu, Bo-Katan, Cassian, Fighters for Freedom, and the Green Squadron A-Wing. So there we go. So there's a lot of units that we're going to have on the board early that are going to be relevant for that. So I think Aggression will just be really fantastic. And then you're dealing with their board at the same time. Last up, we have Bravado. So this is a newer card, and it reads, if you've defeated an enemy unit this phase, this event costs 2 less to play. Ready a unit. So this will be super handy because you've got plenty of cards that are able to take care of ground units, Recker being a fantastic example here, and then being able to ready something after he comes down, depending on what kind of resources we're talking about. But yes, you will be wanting to defeat your opponent's units, they'll be wanting to defeat yours, so having Bravado ready to just really surprise them, and if you do defeat one of their units, it becomes a 3 cost, just ready a unit. Any unit, right? And because we've got units like Poe, Guerrilla Attack Pod, Recker, and Great Dragon with such high damage, that can just finish out a game right there. In fact, you're not even sad about paying 5 for this in the later game to just finish it out. A Great Dragon coming down, next turn, you swing with it, and then stand it back up. That's just a game done if they can't deal with it. So that's pretty amazing. That is my 4 events that I'm running. Then I've got the single upgrade, Heroic Resolve, 3 copies of it. This reads, attached unit gains the action, 2 resources, defeat a Heroic Resolve on this unit, and attack with this unit, it gets +4/+0, and gains Overwhelm for this attack. So I really like Heroic Resolve. It gives you +1/+1 in the meantime. Having that extra bit of health when you're doing damage to your own units can be really handy. But I really like Heroic Resolve, as I mentioned before, paired with Cassian Andor to just smack it on him. And yes, you need 8 resources to get this off, but you are going to get into the late game with this deck. Maybe, if your opponent has been able to deal with you, and they might not have been able to. But if you do, having 8 resources is not unreasonable. Bringing Cassian out of Smuggle, putting him in ready, slapping a heroic resolve on him, and then swinging in with him for 7. It just closes out games. It closes games out of nowhere, and you don't even really need anything in your hand besides heroic resolve to do it. Just so good. I've done it a couple of times and it feels amazing, and that overwhelm is super handy so that if they do manage to get a sentinel out there, you're still swinging through the sentinel or swinging through an opponent's strong, powerful ground unit you need to deal with while still pushing damage into base. So that is the deck. That's the 50 cards. Let's look now at the sideboard. Now, the sideboard is set up to give us greater tools against certain deck archetypes. I have a feeling that we're going to see some really powerful healing decks in the meta, so having Wolf on hand will definitely be worth it, and he might eventually even find his way into the main deck, depending on what that healing looks like. I know I've been testing my Ray Vigilance deck that I've also done a deck analysis on, and the healing in that is just so brutally obnoxious that Wolf might be necessary in the main deck instead. Fangfighter is there to counter upgrade heavy decks, though I don't love it in this deck due to its 2 health. Having 3 health would have been just so much nicer, but it might be absolutely clutch against certain decks, so being able to put it in from the sideboard I think will be really handy. Saying that, Confiscate may just be the better option due to being able to play under curve and it only being 1 resource, but it also doesn't push damage like a Fangfighter can. I think more testing is going to be needed, and we'll confirm which is the better option there. I just thought I'd point that out. The Chaos of War card comes in versus Control to punish opponents for bigger hands and provide the option for some out-of-hand damage if the match needs it, while the Valiant Assault Ship is a novel counter against ramp decks. I think ramp will be very popular in the Shadows meta. We've already seen, is it 2 or 3 or 4 extra ramp cards come in this set, and heroes in particular have options to ramp like they didn't before. So the Valiant Assault Ships may eventually find their way into the main deck as well. Playing a 5/2 in space for only resources, 3 resources, is going to feel real good if the opponent doesn't have an easy counter for it, but playing it at 4 is also just fine. It also provides an answer to your opponent's early game space units, as this deck is very ground heavy, so if you're facing an aggro deck and they've got a hard into space, bringing in the Valiant Assault Ships is going to be handy as well, and will trade quite nicely. Having that Saboteur there is really handy, and its ability on attack, if the defending player controls more resources than you, this unit gets +2. So that's what I was talking about. If your opponent has ramped and you can bring this in, it then becomes a 5/2 on attack for only 3 resources, which is crazy. It's just so good and just pushing damage in a way that no other deck is because of Han's ability. So that is everything, the deck and the sideboard. Now, in initial testing, this deck feels really powerful. It has inherent ramp from its leader, it has strong early plays, some of the best mid-game units in set 2, the ability to bring in units ready, it has cheap events to finish off your opponent's unit, and an amazing endgame piece in the Crate Dragon. It's the kind of deck that can do it all and doesn't feel like it's sacrificing anything to be so aggressive, so fast, and so flexible. At no point did I feel like the deck runs out of steam in a way that a Sabine deck or a Yellow Han might. I'm not yet sure where Red Han decks will end up with their early curve. I did already talk about that. I've included 2 drops in here. They may eventually get removed for more 3 drops and to push that more mid-later game because of Han's ability, but we'll just wait and see. It will be really interesting to see how this deck evolves as the meta does. It might be that For a Cause I Believe In sneaks back in, but I'm kind of hoping it doesn't, just to free up the creativity of the deck building. Not including Red 3 also feels absolutely sacrilegious, and that A-Wing may indeed turn into a Red 3. We do have a lot of heroic units, so while I do have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, and a couple in the sideboard that aren't heroic, I think you could still probably justify including Red 3. Noting, of course, that you can play it for 2 resources with Han's ability and put a 2/1 in space with Raid 1 that gives all your heroic units Raid 1 as well. It's really good for 2 resources. Nothing to sniff at, though, with Cad Bane, as I said, looking to be quite popular. I'm just not that keen on wanting to use Han's ability for units with 1 health. Other mentions go to the new Hunting Nexu card, who, with Han's ability, comes in as a 4/2 with Raid 2 for 3 resources. Ugh, wild. It's just, you're pushing 6 damage for 3 resources. There's nothing else that can push this much damage if your opponent either doesn't want to or doesn't have the ability to deal with these units. And lastly, something I thought might also be really good is the event Desperate Attack, allowing a damaged unit to do another 2 damage for only 1 resource, which feels like it was also kind of made for this deck, and that would just be a really nice close there, kind of your own cheaper surprise strike. There's just so many good cards and so little space in the deck. Overall, I think Hard Aggression, whether it be in this exact form or something similar, will be hitting the meta in a big way. I don't know if it's going to be winning tournaments necessarily or winning them all, but I reckon it's going to be a hurdle for other decks if they want to get into the top cut, so you'll want a way to beat it. From a weakness perspective, if the opponent has efficient and plentiful ways to deal with low health units, then this deck starts to stumble. Cad Bane, especially when deployed, is a pretty decent counter to this deck, and that's why, even though this deck has some serious hitting power, I don't think it's a sure thing that it will be considered highly competitive. Saying that, it's going to absolutely clean up aggro decks. I think. At least that's what I found in testing. We'll wait and see if that bold claim is true. But that brings us to the end of our Unlimited chats for today. Thank you so much for watching. My plan is to keep the Star Wars Unlimited content coming, so if you enjoyed this video, go on ahead and subscribe. Importantly, make sure to keep cracking those packs and getting unleashed for Unlimited.